The crystal chandeliers at the Grand Crest Hotel cast rainbow shadows across the white tablecloths. 43 years at Cascadia National Bank, and they'd thrown me a retirement party that looked like a wedding reception. My ex-wife Clarissa sat to my left in her emerald green dress, the one that cost more than most people's cars. She smiled that perfect socialite smile while whispering something to our daughter Isabel. My son Trent was already 3 drinks deep, his face red as a lobster. Gerald Mason, my old friend and financial advisor, raised his glass for another toast. Everyone laughed at his jokes about my legendary spreadsheet skills, but I noticed the way Clarissa's fingers drummed against her wine glass, the way Isabel kept checking her phone, the way Gerald's eyes never quite met mine. Something was crawling under the surface of this perfect celebration, and I could feel it in my bones. The envelope appeared during dessert, sliding across the white tablecloth like a snake. Clarissa placed it next to my chocolate cake with that same smile she'd worn to every bank function for 30 years. "Just some retirement paperwork, darling," she said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Nothing urgent." Inside were divorce papers, asset transfer forms, and pension authorization documents, all neatly organized with yellow sticky notes marking where I needed to sign. My hands didn't shake as I read through each page. 43 years of marriage reduced to legal terms and dollar amounts. The house would go to Clarissa. The investment accounts would be split. My pension would be redirected. Even my classic car collection had been itemized and divided. They'd planned this down to the last detail, timing it perfectly when I'd be too shocked and embarrassed to fight back in public. Isabel held her phone at just the right angle, pretending to take family photos while actually recording everything. I watched her in my peripheral vision, noting how she captured each signature, each document I touched. She was building evidence, making sure they had proof I'd agreed to everything willingly. No coercion, no duress. Just a tired old man signing away his life at his own retirement party. Gerald leaned over to point at specific clauses, his voice warm and helpful. "This section here protects your credit rating," he explained for the recording. "And this ensures a smooth transition." The other guests continued their conversations, oblivious to the execution happening 3 feet away. When I signed the final page, Isabel smiled and kissed my cheek. "We love you, Dad," she said, loud and clear for the phone's microphone. Perfect performance from a perfect daughter who'd learned to lie from the best. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my untouched cake. 3 generations of Whitakers watched me, waiting for the explosion that never came. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic scene that would ruin their perfect plan. Instead, I stood up slowly, straightened my tie, and nodded. "Well played," I said quietly, just loud enough for our table to hear. Clarissa's smile flickered for just a moment. She'd expected rage, maybe pleading, not calm acceptance from a man who'd just lost everything he'd worked for. I walked to each person at our table and shook their hands. Thanked them for coming. I wished them well. Gerald's palm was sweaty when I gripped it. "Take good care of her," I said, looking him straight in the eye. By the time I reached the exit, conversations had resumed. Nobody followed me. They had what they wanted, and I was no longer useful. But they'd forgotten something important. They'd forgotten who they were dealing with. 15 years earlier, I'd been backing up Clarissa's phone to our shared cloud account when I found them. Text messages that made my blood turn to ice water. Photos that explained why she'd been working late so many evenings. Call logs showing hours of conversation with Gerald while I was traveling to the bank. The affair had been going on for months, maybe years. But what shocked me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how carefully they'd planned it. Gerald had been feeding her information about my accounts, my investments, my pension structure. They were building a roadmap to my financial destruction, one pillow talk conversation at a time. That night, I sat in my study until dawn, staring at the evidence on my laptop screen. Most men would have confronted them immediately, filed for divorce, fought for their share, maybe won 50% if they were lucky. But I wasn't most men. I was a former military intelligence officer who'd spent 40 years analyzing patterns and predicting human behavior. And I had a much better idea. Gerald's text to Clarissa came through at 11:47 p.m., 3 days before my retirement party. "Once his retirement papers are signed, we'll have everything lined up. The house transfers Monday, investments by Wednesday. He'll be too shocked to react properly." I read it on my phone while brushing my teeth, the same phone that had been mirroring her messages for 15 years. They thought they were so clever, timing everything for maximum impact. Hitting me when I'd be emotional, surrounded by colleagues, trapped by social pressure to stay calm and dignified. They'd calculated every angle except one. They assumed I was the same trusting fool who'd married Clarissa in 1981. But that man had died the night I found their first messages. The man standing in that bathroom had spent 15 years preparing for exactly this moment. Every document they'd made me sign that night was worthless. Every account they thought they'd claimed was empty. Every asset they'd counted was already gone. They'd been hunting a ghost for over a decade. The next morning, I activated protocols I'd been building since 2009. My military training had taught me that the best intelligence operations take years to mature, and the best revenge is served so cold it gives you frostbite. I'd learned patience during 3 tours in Afghanistan, analyzing enemy movements for months before striking. Clarissa and Gerald had made one crucial mistake. They thought I was just a bank executive who pushed papers around. They'd forgotten I'd spent my 20s learning how to become invisible, how to move money without leaving trails, how to gather intelligence without being detected. By the time I walked into that retirement party, I'd already been dead for years. At least, financially speaking. Samuel Whitaker, the bank executive, existed only on paper now. The real me had been quietly disappearing piece by piece, creating new identities, new accounts, new lives they could never touch. During the day, I was the perfect husband. I brought Clarissa coffee in bed, complimented her dresses, and listened to her complaints about the gardener. I attended Isabel's law firm parties and praised her latest cases. I bailed Trent out of his gambling debts and pretended not to notice when money went missing from my wallet. But at night, I became someone else entirely. Someone who understood offshore banking, anonymous trusts, and digital surveillance. Someone who knew that the best place to hide was in plain sight. Every evening after dinner, I'd excuse myself to my study to catch up on bank paperwork. Instead, I was documenting their crimes, recording their conversations, building files that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. The man they thought they were betraying had been extinct for years. They were just too arrogant to notice. Creating my new identity took 3 years of careful planning. Birth certificates could be obtained if you knew the right people in the right government offices. Social security numbers could be established through a labyrinth of paperwork that most people couldn't navigate. But I wasn't most people. I'd spent decades moving money through international systems, understanding how bureaucracies worked, knowing which forms created which trails. By 2012, Marcus Wellington existed as completely as Samuel Whitaker. He had credit cards, bank accounts, a driver's license, even a passport. He owned properties in Montana, Colorado, and Thailand. He had investment portfolios worth more than Samuel Whitaker's official net worth. And best of all, Marcus Wellington was completely invisible to anyone searching for Samuel Whitaker. My family had been planning to rob a man who'd already moved his treasure chest to a completely different island. The beautiful part was how they helped me do it. Every time Gerald advised me to diversify my investments, I moved more money out of their reach. When Clarissa suggested we upgrade our insurance policies, I created new beneficiaries they didn't know existed. When Isabel recommended setting up trust funds for future grandchildren, I established accounts that only I could access. They thought they were fattening the pig for slaughter. Instead, they were helping me build an escape tunnel right under their noses. Gerald's financial advice was actually quite good, just not in the way he intended. By the time of my retirement party, the Samuel Whitaker they'd spent 15 years planning to destroy had about $8,000 in legitimate assets. Everything else belonged to Marcus Wellington, a man who didn't exist in their world. It was almost poetic how completely they'd outsmarted themselves. But I wasn't just moving money. I was collecting evidence like a prosecutor building a murder case. Isabel's law practice had some very questionable clients, and she'd bent quite a few ethical rules to keep them happy. I had recordings of her coaching witnesses, photos of her accepting cash payments, emails showing her falsifying documents. Trent's gambling addiction had led him to embezzle money from his employer's accounts. I'd been quietly tracking every transaction, every forged check, every client fund he'd borrowed and never returned. Gerald's financial advisory business was a masterpiece of fraud. He'd been overcharging elderly clients, investing their money in schemes he secretly owned, and skimming fees that weren't disclosed. I had 15 years of evidence showing how he'd built his wealth by robbing people who trusted him. They'd all committed felonies while thinking they were untouchable. But I'd been watching, always watching. 3 days after my retirement party, I implemented the final phase. At 6 a.m. on Thursday morning, Samuel Whitaker ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Bank accounts were closed. Credit cards were canceled. Investment portfolios were liquidated. Insurance policies were transferred. Even my employment records at Cascadia National were mysteriously corrupted, showing only that someone named Samuel Whitaker had worked there, but leaving no details about his positions, his access levels, or his departure. I'd spent 2 years quietly befriending the right people in IT, the ones who understood that sometimes computer systems just glitch in very convenient ways. By noon, their lawyers were calling banks that had no record of Samuel Whitaker ever having significant assets. Their private investigators were searching for a man whose digital footprint had evaporated like morning mist. It was like trying to arrest a ghost. From my secret apartment downtown, I watched their panic unfold through security cameras I'd been installing for 3 years. Clarissa's first hint came when her credit card was declined at Nordstrom. She tried 3 different cards before calling the bank, her voice getting higher with each failed transaction. The bank told her the accounts were closed by the primary account holder that morning. "But I'm his wife," she screamed into the phone. "We're divorced," came the calm reply. As of Tuesday evening, according to our records, I'd filed the papers the morning after the retirement party, citing irreconcilable differences and noting that we'd already agreed to asset division. The clerk had been very helpful, especially after I'd made a substantial donation to the courthouse renovation fund. Gerald arrived 20 minutes later, his BMW screeching into the driveway like he was fleeing a crime scene. Through the bedroom camera, I watched him try to calm Clarissa down while frantically calling his own contacts. None of them had answers. Trent's meltdown was even more spectacular. He'd been counting on his inheritance to cover the money he'd stolen from his law firm, money that was supposed to be returned by Friday or criminal charges would be filed. His usual ATM gave him an account not found message. The bank's customer service line informed him that Samuel Whitaker had closed all accounts and left no forwarding information. "But he's my father," Trent shouted. "I need to reach him." The representative politely explained that they couldn't help locate former customers, even for family members. Trent tried calling my office at Cascadia National, but my replacement had never heard of Samuel Whitaker. HR claimed their records showed no employee by that name in recent years. It was like watching a man try to grab smoke with his bare hands. By evening, Trent was crying into his scotch glass while Clarissa stood over him, demanding answers he couldn't provide. Isabel was the smartest of the 3, but even she couldn't trace money that had never officially existed. She called in favors from private investigators, forensic accountants, and database specialists. They found the same thing everyone else found: nothing. Samuel Whitaker had been a perfectly ordinary bank executive with a modest salary and reasonable savings. His retirement party had been real. His employment had been real. His marriage had been real. But his wealth had apparently been an illusion. "It's impossible," she told her mother over dinner. "People can't just vanish with millions of dollars. There are laws, regulations, and paper trails." But I'd spent 40 years learning how those laws worked, how those regulations could be navigated, and how paper trails could be erased by people who understood the system well enough. Isabel was hunting with a magnifying glass in a forest where all the trees looked identical. She was brilliant, but she'd never learned to think like someone who'd spent decades staying 3 steps ahead of people exactly like her. Gerald was the first domino to fall. On Monday morning, federal regulators walked into his office with boxes and badges. I'd been feeding them evidence for 6 months through an anonymous tip line, carefully spacing out the revelations so they'd have time to build a proper case. His client files were seized, his computers were confiscated, and his assets were frozen pending investigation. The local news ran a story that evening: financial advisor charged with elder abuse, fraud. Gerald's booking photo showed a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. His lawyer's statement claimed the charges were baseless, but the evidence spoke for itself. 15 years of falsified documents, unauthorized transactions, and undisclosed conflicts of interest. The prosecutor called it one of the most comprehensive fraud schemes she'd ever seen. Gerald's bond was set at $2 million, money he no longer had access to since his accounts were frozen. He'd spent years stealing from old people, and now he was learning what it felt like to be helpless. Trent's employer received an anonymous package on Tuesday morning. Inside were bank statements showing exactly how their client trust funds had been systematically drained over 18 months. Forged signatures, fictional transactions, money transfers to accounts Trent controlled. The package included a note. Check the Henderson estate settlement from last month. The family never received their inheritance. By Wednesday, Trent was escorted from his office by security guards while police waited to take him into custody. The local bar association was notified, and his law license was immediately suspended. The irony wasn't lost on me. Trent had spent years complaining that his trust fund wasn't big enough, so he decided to create his own trust fund using other people's money. Now he was facing 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. His mugshot made him look like a scared child, which in many ways he'd always been. A scared child who'd never learned that actions have consequences. Isabel's turn came on Thursday. The State Bar of California received a sealed envelope containing 15 years of evidence showing her ethical violations. Witness coaching, document falsification, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and accepting payments that weren't reported to the court. The evidence was so comprehensive that the disciplinary committee voted to suspend her license immediately pending a full investigation. Her law firm, terrified of being associated with the scandal, placed her on indefinite leave. Her clients started calling other attorneys. Her reputation, built over 15 years of careful networking, crumbled in 15 hours. The local legal newspaper ran a front-page story. Prominent attorney under investigation for multiple ethics violations. Isabel's photo showed a woman trying to hide her face from cameras. The same woman who'd always loved being photographed at charity galas and political fundraisers. She'd built her career on the assumption that rules were for other people. Now she was learning that rules eventually find everyone, especially people arrogant enough to think they're untouchable. A courier delivered the final message on Friday afternoon. Clarissa signed for the package with shaking hands, probably hoping it contained some explanation, some way to reach me, some path back to their old lives. Instead, she found a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photo was 15 years old, taken at a restaurant downtown. It showed her and Gerald in an intimate embrace, his hand on her face, her eyes closed in obvious passion. The note was simple. You've been playing checkers while I played chess. Checkmate. Clarissa stared at the photo for a long time, probably remembering that evening, wondering how I'd known where to find them. She didn't know about the private investigator I'd hired, the one who'd been following them for months. She didn't know about the listening devices I'd planted in Gerald's office. She didn't know about the 15 years of careful documentation that had led to this moment. All she knew was that the quiet husband she'd been cheating on had somehow orchestrated the complete destruction of everyone she cared about. That weekend, my estranged brother Richard called Clarissa. I'd reached out to him months earlier, explaining the situation and asking for one small favor. Richard had always disliked my family, though they were using me. He'd been waiting years for permission to tell them exactly what he thought. You never knew who you married, he told Clarissa over the phone. Sam wasn't just some bank executive. He spent 6 years in military intelligence before he came home. He knows things about surveillance and financial systems that you can't even imagine. You picked the wrong man to betray. Richard's call was the final piece of psychological warfare. Until that moment, they'd been dealing with the impossible disappearance of Samuel Whitaker, the mild-mannered banker they thought they'd known. Now they realized they'd actually been living with a trained intelligence operative who'd been planning their destruction for over a decade. The man they'd been betraying had never existed. They'd been married to a ghost. The invitations arrived the following Monday, delivered by professional couriers to their temporary hotel rooms. Cream-colored paper with gold embossing, the kind Clarissa had always insisted on for formal events. You are cordially invited to attend a settlement meeting regarding the estate of Samuel Whitaker. Grand Crest Hotel, Presidential Suite, Thursday at 2 p.m. Attorneys will be present to discuss asset recovery and restitution. It looked completely legitimate, complete with law firm letterhead and contact information. Clarissa called the number and spoke to a receptionist who confirmed the meeting and provided additional details about required documentation. Isabel researched the law firm and found a respected practice specializing in complex financial disputes. Gerald, out on bond and desperate for any chance to recover his losses, insisted they all attend. They spent 3 days preparing, gathering every document they could find, practicing their explanations, convincing themselves that this was their opportunity to get some of their old lives back. Thursday afternoon, they walked into the presidential suite expecting to find lawyers and negotiation tables. Instead, they found reporters from 3 local news stations, federal agents with badges and handcuffs, and a large projection screen showing financial documents they'd never seen before. The lawyers were actually FBI financial crimes specialists who'd been building cases based on my anonymous tips for the past year. This settlement meeting was the final step in a coordinated law enforcement operation that had taken months to plan. Clarissa tried to leave immediately, but agents blocked the exits. Isabel demanded to call her attorney, but was informed she'd need to contact someone other than her current lawyer, who was also under investigation. Gerald just stood there, staring at the projection screen showing 15 years of his fraudulent transactions in excruciating detail. They'd walked into a trap so perfectly designed that they'd actually helped build it by attending voluntarily. The projection screen lit up with evidence they'd never imagined existed. Bank statements showing Gerald's systematic theft from elderly clients. Security camera footage of Trent forging signatures on legal documents. Audio recordings of Isabel coaching witnesses to lie under oath. Financial records proving that all 3 of them had been planning to defraud me for over a year. The lead prosecutor explained that this was one of the most comprehensive fraud rings they'd investigated, spanning multiple jurisdictions and involving dozens of victims. Media cameras rolled as agents read them their rights. The same reporters who'd covered my retirement party 5 weeks earlier were now documenting their arrests. Isabel tried to cover her face, but the cameras caught everything. Gerald looked like a man watching his own funeral. Clarissa just stared at the screen, probably trying to figure out how the quiet husband she'd betrayed had orchestrated something this sophisticated. Then came my voice from hidden speakers throughout the room. A pre-recorded message I'd spent weeks crafting, delivered with the calm precision I'd learned during military briefings. Hello, Clarissa. Hello, Gerald. Hello to my children who forgot they had a father who loved them. The room fell silent as my words filled the space. You spent 15 years planning to destroy Samuel Whitaker at his retirement party. What you didn't realize is that I spent those same 15 years planning to destroy the people who betrayed him. You thought you were hunting a sheep. Instead, you were being stalked by a wolf who'd learned patience. I explained how every piece of evidence had been gathered, how every financial move had been tracked, how every crime had been documented. You wanted to erase me from my own life. Instead, I erased you from yours. The difference is that you committed crimes to get what you wanted. I just collected evidence and waited for justice to find you. 6 months later, I was sitting on a beach in Bali, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. My tablet showed news updates from home. Gerald had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Trent got 8 years for embezzlement. Isabel lost her law license permanently and received 5 years of probation. Clarissa wasn't charged with any crimes, but her divorce from Gerald had left her with nothing but legal bills and a reputation that made her unemployable. I opened my encrypted laptop and deleted the final surveillance file, the last digital trace of the man who'd spent 15 years documenting their betrayal. Marcus Wellington had a new life now, one built on legitimate investments and honest relationships. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about destroying my family. I tell them that I didn't destroy anyone. I just stopped protecting people who were destroying themselves. They wanted to erase me from my retirement party. Instead, I erased them from their futures. The best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even, getting out, and getting on with the life you actually deserve.